The gavel was a crack of thunder in the suffocating silence of the courtroom. Cole stood with his fists clenched, the knuckles white as bone. Judge Harrison, a man whose soul was as starched and cold as his collar, stared down from his perch. This court finds the woman, designated Jane Doe, to be a vagrant and indentured property. She will be remanded to my custody for proper placement. The words were a death sentence. Cole felt a small, trembling hand slip into his. It was May. Her eyes, enormous and dark, were fixed on him, not with fear, but with a fragile, impossible trust. He had made her a promise, and he would burn the whole world down to keep it. This is a story about a promise that rebuilt a man's broken heart and forged a legacy in the dust of a forgotten land. If you believe love is the one law that can never be broken, then you know what to do. Follow our channel for more stories that remind us of the light that can be found in the darkest of places. The heat pressed down on the valley like a physical weight, bleaching the sky to a pale, hazy blue and baking the very life from the soil. For Cole, the heat was just another layer of the emptiness that had settled over his life since he'd buried Sarah and the baby. The ranch was silent now, save for the buzz of flies and the lowing of cattle. The house, once filled with laughter and the scent of baking bread, was a hollow monument to what he had lost. He moved through his days like a ghost, his heart a locked room with the key thrown away. Each sunrise was a chore, each sunset a bitter reminder of another day survived, not lived. The dust was his constant companion, coating his boots, his throat, and his memories. He'd rise before dawn, his movements economical and devoid of joy, forcing down stale coffee and a piece of hardtack before heading out. He'd ride the fence lines, his face a grim mask under the brim of his hat, his eyes scanning the horizon for stray cattle but seeing only the ghosts of a woman and a child who were no longer there. His hands, calloused and strong, knew the work, but his spirit had long since abandoned the effort. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a low rasp from disuse. The folks in town left him be. They knew his story. They saw the jagged edges of his grief and gave him a wide berth, whispering about the tragedy that had hollowed him out. He was the broken protector, with nothing left to protect. The sun was a malevolent eye in the sky, searing the parched earth as he checked a dried-up creek bed miles from his homestead. That's when he heard it. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the screech of a hawk. It was a sound so faint, so utterly human and desperate, it cut through the thick haze of his apathy. A whimper. He followed the sound, his horse picking its way carefully through the cracked mud and brittle scrub, and then he saw it. A large, round wooden crate, crudely made, abandoned under the merciless sun. It looked like something used for shipping goods, but it was out here, in the middle of nowhere. Pure, white, hot rage, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the fine, hot dust. He approached the crate, his hand resting on the butt of the pistol he rarely used. He called out, "Anyone in there?" Silence. Then another muffled sob, weaker this time. With a grunt, he jammed the tip of his bowie knife into the seam of the lid and pried. The wood groaned, splintered, and gave way. The stench of sweat and fear washed over him. And inside, curled into a space far too small for a person, was a young woman. She was impossibly small, dressed in what had once been a white prairie dress, now tattered and stained with grime. Her black hair was matted, her face smudged with dirt and tears. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They were wide, terrified, and held the kind of deep, soul-shattering trauma he recognized from the mirror. She flinched, scrambling back against the rough wood of the crate, a wounded animal bracing for a blow. He held up his hands slowly, gently. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice softer than he'd used it in years. "I ain't going to hurt you." He unhooked his canteen, the sloshing of the water an obscene sound in the dead quiet. He uncorked it and held it out. She stared at it, then at him, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. He took a small sip himself to show it was safe, then offered it again. Her hand, so delicate and trembling, reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she took the canteen, and a jolt went through him, a spark of connection in the desolate landscape of his soul. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and onto the front of her ruined dress. When the canteen was empty, she looked at him, a question in her haunted eyes. He simply nodded, his own throat tight. "Let's get you out of this heat," he said, knowing she couldn't understand the words, only the tone. He reached in, and though she flinched again, she didn't fight him as he carefully lifted her from her prison. She was light as a bird, a fragile collection of bones and spirit. He carried her to his horse, set her in the saddle, and mounted behind her, his arm a steady presence around her waist. As they rode back toward the silent ranch, he felt the faint, rhythmic beat of her heart against his arm. It was the first sign of life he'd felt, truly felt, in over 2 years. Then everything changed. He brought her into the house, a place no one but him had set foot in since Sarah's passing. The air was stale, thick with dust motes dancing in the shafts of late afternoon light. He carried her straight to the spare room, the one they had painted yellow for the baby, and gently set her on the bed. The quilt was handmade by Sarah, a pattern of sunbursts and prairie flowers. The irony was a bitter pill. The young woman, who he would later learn was named May, curled into a tight ball on the mattress, her eyes tracking his every move. He left the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and went to the kitchen. He worked on autopilot, pumping fresh water into a basin, finding a clean rag, and cutting a piece of bread, softening it with milk. When he returned, he placed the basin on the nightstand and the food beside it. He gestured to them, then backed away toward the door, trying to make himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "You're safe here," he said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "Promise." He closed the door softly behind him, leaving it slightly ajar. He spent that first night on a chair in the hallway, listening. He heard the quiet splash of water, the scrape of the plate. And later, in the deep, dark hours of the night, he heard the sounds he expected. The choked sobs, the terrified whimpers of a nightmare tearing through her sleep. He didn't go in. He just sat there, a silent guardian, his own ghosts stirring in the shadows, recognizing a kinship with the ones haunting the girl in the yellow room. The next few days fell into a slow, careful rhythm. It was a silent dance of trust. He would leave food and fresh water outside her door, and when he returned, the plate would be empty. He caught glimpses of her, a fleeting shadow in the hallway, or a pale face in the window watching him work in the corral. He never pushed, never tried to force a conversation she couldn't understand. He simply existed, a constant, steady presence. He spoke to her sometimes, his voice low and calm as he worked on the porch, mending a leather strap or cleaning his tack. He told her about the land, about his horse, about the way the sun set behind the mesas. He didn't know if she understood a single word, but he felt she understood the intent. One afternoon, he found her standing in the doorway to the kitchen, watching him. She was wearing one of Sarah's old work shirts, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times, the fabric hanging off her small frame. Her hair was clean, combed, and tied back with a piece of twine. She had washed the grime from her face, revealing delicate features and skin the color of pale almond. But the scars were visible now. Faint, silvery lines on her wrists, and a darker, angrier burn mark on her forearm. He stopped what he was doing, his heart aching. He didn't comment on them, just gave her a small, sad smile. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. She walked to the sink, picked up a dirty plate, and began to wash it. It was the first offering, the first sign that she was starting to see this place not as another prison, but but as a potential sanctuary. The quiet domesticity was shattered a week later by the arrival of 3 riders. Cole saw the dust cloud from a mile off and knew it meant trouble. He stood on the porch, his stance wide, his hands loose at his sides as they reined in their horses. The man in the center was Judge Harrison, the most powerful and feared man in the territory. His face was a mask of cold authority, his suit immaculate despite the dust. "Cole," the judge said, his voice smooth and dangerous, "I hear you've come into some lost property." Cole's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about, Judge." The judge dismounted, his polished boots sinking into the dirt of Cole's yard. He was followed by 2 hired men, their faces hard and mean. "Don't play dumb with me, boy. A Chinese girl, part of a shipment of laborers for the railroad. She caused some trouble and ran off. She belongs to the company." Cole felt a cold fury rise in his chest. He saw a flicker of movement at the window behind him. May was watching. "She ain't property, Judge. She's a person." Judge Harrison laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's a matter of legal interpretation. She is an asset, a piece of inventory that has been misplaced. I'm here to collect it. Now you can hand her over peacefully, or my men can retrieve her. It makes no difference to me." He gestured dismissively toward the house. "These people, they ain't like us. They don't feel things the way we do. They're bred for labor, nothing more. It's the natural order of things." The villain's monologue, plain and simple, laid out a worldview so rotten it turned Cole's stomach. This was the moment, the line in the sand. He took a step forward, blocking the path to his door. He thought of the terrified girl in the crate, of the scars on her arms, of the quiet bravery it took for her to wash a single plate in his kitchen. He looked the judge dead in the eye, his voice low and trembling with a force he hadn't known he still possessed. "You ain't touching her. She stays here. With me." The judge's smile vanished. "Is that your final word, Cole? You're making a powerful enemy." Cole's gaze didn't waver. "She ain't cargo, and she ain't leaving. I will never let them take you," he said, the last part directed not at the judge, but at the listening silence of the house behind him. It was a promise, a vow sealed in the oppressive summer heat. A war had just been declared on his dusty front porch. The judge and his men left, but the threat lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Cole knew Harrison wasn't a man who let things go. He was a snake, and he would strike again. Likely with the full force of the law he twisted to his own purposes. The next morning Cole saddled his horse. He found May in the small garden Sarah had tended, her small hands gently pulling weeds from around the sun-scorched tomato plants. He approached her slowly. He used simple gestures, pointing to himself, then to the town on the horizon, then back to her, trying to convey that he had to leave, but would return. She watched him, her expression unreadable, but when he turned to go, her voice, small and hesitant, stopped him. "Cole?" It was the first time she had said his name. The sound of it, spoken in her soft accent, was a physical blow. He turned back. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes pleading. She didn't have the words, but he understood perfectly. "Don't leave me." "I'll be back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, little one. I'm just going to get some help." He rode into town with a grim purpose. His first stop was the office of Dr. Abram, a man whose wisdom was as well known as his skill with a needle and thread. The doctor was old, with kind eyes crinkled by years of looking into the souls of his patients. Cole explained everything, the crate, the scars, the judge's visit. Doctor Abram listened without interruption, his hands steepled under his chin. "I'll ride out this afternoon," the doctor said when Cole had finished. "I need to document her condition, malnutrition, dehydration, wounds. We need proof that she was mistreated. Proof that she's a victim, not a piece of freight." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Be careful, Cole. Judge Harrison owns this town. The sheriff, the merchants, they're all in his pocket. He's been involved with the railroad contracts for years. There have been whispers, ugly whispers, about how he procures his labor. No one's ever dared to challenge him." Cole's jaw was set. "I am." His next stop was a small, dusty office with a shingle that read, "Thomas Albright, Attorney at Law." Albright was young, fresh from the East, and his face still held a measure of idealism that the frontier hadn't yet sandblasted away. He was also terrified. "Challenge Judge Harrison?" Albright stammered, pushing his glasses up his nose. "On behalf of an undocumented immigrant? It's impossible. He controls the circuit. He is the law here." "The law is supposed to protect people, ain't it?" Cole countered, his voice a low growl. "She was left to die in a box, for God's sake. There has to be something we can do." Albright paced his small office, running a hand through his thinning hair. "He'll claim she's an indentured servant who violated her contract. He'll produce papers, likely forged, and the court will uphold them. Without a witness, without concrete evidence of his illegal activities, it's your word against his. And his word, I'm afraid, carries the weight of gold." Cole left the lawyer's office with a heavy heart, but a renewed sense of resolve. If the law wouldn't help him, he would find another way. He was no longer just a man drifting through grief. He was a protector. He had a promise to keep. When he returned to the ranch, Dr. Abram was already there. He saw them through the window, sitting at the kitchen table. May was showing the doctor the burn on her arm, and for the first time she was talking, her voice a low, musical murmur, punctuated by gestures. Dr. Abram was listening intently, his face a mixture of professional concern and human compassion. The anchor had arrived. Cole stood on the porch, watching them, a fierce, protective love swelling in his chest. This was his family now. This small, broken woman and this good old man. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was a life with purpose, and he would fight for it. The weeks that followed were a strange, fragile peace, a calm before the inevitable storm. Dr. Abram's visit had worked a small miracle. Having another gentle presence in the house, a man who treated her with kindness and respect, seemed to open a door in May's soul. She began to blossom. The haunted look in her eyes receded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. She started spending more time out of her room, exploring the small world of the ranch house. She discovered Sarah's collection of pressed flowers, her delicate fingers tracing the outlines of black-eyed Susans and Indian paintbrush. She found a small box of sewing materials, and, with a skill that spoke of long practice, began mending Cole's worn-out shirts, her stitches small and perfect. The silence in the house was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of grief, but a comfortable, shared quiet. They ate their meals together at the kitchen table. At first, the only sounds were the clinking of forks against plates. Then, May began to speak. She would point to an object and look at him expectantly. "Spoon," he'd say, and she would repeat the word, her pronunciation careful, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Bread." "Water." "Sky." It became their ritual, a slow and patient building of a bridge between their two worlds. He learned she was fiercely intelligent, picking up the new language with astonishing speed. She told him her name was May, which meant beautiful in her language. She told him about the village she came from, a place of green hills and flowing rivers, a world away from the red dust of his home. She didn't speak of the journey, or the crate, or the men who had hurt her. That part of her past remained a locked room, and he didn't push for the key. One evening he was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sky bleed into shades of orange and purple. May came and sat beside him, a respectable distance between them. She held out her hand. In her palm was a small, intricately folded paper bird. It was a crane. "For luck," she said, her English still hesitant but clear. He took it from her, his rough fingers brushing against hers. The paper was warm from her touch. He looked at the delicate creation, then at her. Her face, in the soft twilight, was breathtakingly lovely. The gratitude he felt for her had slowly, imperceptibly transformed into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling in love. "Thank you, May," he said, his voice husky. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Their shared peace was a temporary illusion. The storm broke on a Tuesday. The sheriff, a man whose spine was as flexible as his paycheck demanded, rode up to the ranch with a summons. It was an official court order. A hearing was to be held in 2 days' time to determine the legal status of one Jane Doe of Asiatic origin. It was signed by Judge Theron Harrison. The fight was here. Cole and May rode into town on the morning of the hearing. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the coming rain. People stopped and stared as they passed. Whispers followed them like shadows, fueled by the judge's campaign of poison. Cole could feel May trembling beside him, but she held her head high, her small hand gripping his arm. The courtroom was packed. It was a theater, and Judge Harrison was the director, star, and producer. He sat on the bench, his face impassive, a mockery of justice. The lawyer he had hired for the railroad company was a slick, oily man who presented a case built on lies and prejudice. He produced a document, a supposed contract of indenture, bearing a smudged signature that was meant to be May's. He painted her as a deceitful runaway, a piece of property that had been stolen by a lonely, misguided rancher. "Mr. Cole," the lawyer sneered, "took this woman in not out of charity, but to satisfy his own needs. A lonely widower, who can say what his intentions truly are?" Cole lunged forward, a roar of fury in his throat, but Dr. Abram, sitting behind him, put a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Don't, son," the doctor whispered. "That's what he wants." When Cole took the stand, his words were simple and honest. He spoke of the crate, of her condition, of the promise he'd made. The judge listened with an air of profound boredom, dismissing his testimony as emotional hyperbole. It was a sham. The outcome was preordained. The judge was about to deliver his verdict. Cole could feel the hope draining from the room, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the judge's power. He looked at May. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. He had failed her. His promise was turning to ash in his mouth. Then, the back door of the courtroom creaked open. A young man stood there, twisting a worn hat in his trembling hands. It was Thomas Albright, the lawyer who had been too afraid to help. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a pale, nervous-looking clerk from the railroad office, a young man named Finn. "Your Honor," Albright said, his voice shaking but clear, "I have a new witness and new evidence." Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Albright." "Justice is often irregular, Your Honor," Albright replied, a newfound courage in his voice. He called Finn to the stand. The clerk was terrified, his eyes darting toward the judge, but he didn't back down. He spoke of a second set of ledgers hidden in the judge's office, ledgers that didn't document indentured servants, but human cargo, bought and sold like cattle. She spoke of the voyage, the lies they were told, the horrors they endured, and then she pointed a trembling finger directly at the man on the bench. "He is a monster," she said, her voice ringing with undeniable truth. "He hurt my friends. He tried to kill me. He is a man with no soul." The judge's authority shattered like glass. At that moment, the doors to the courtroom swung open again. A U.S. Marshal, a tall, grim-faced man who had clearly been waiting for this moment, stepped inside, flanked by 2 deputies. "Theron Harrison," the marshal's voice boomed, "you are under arrest for violations of federal human trafficking laws." The judge stared, his mouth agape, as the deputies advanced on the bench. His empire of fear and corruption had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. Pure, unadulterated victory. The sun felt warmer on their skin as they stepped out of the courthouse. The crowd parted for them, their whispers now tinged with awe and respect. May was no longer an object of pity or suspicion. She was a survivor, a hero. Cole looked down at her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. She was free, legally, officially, a citizen of this new world. In the golden light of the afternoon, surrounded by the raw, dusty reality of the town she had nearly died in, he knew what he had to do. He took both of her hands in his. "May," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I made a promise to protect you, but it's more than that now. I reckon my home ain't a home without you in it. My heart ain't a heart without you in it." He swallowed hard, his gaze locked with hers. "I ain't a man of fancy words, but I love you. Will you marry me, May?" Her eyes, which had seen so much horror, filled with tears of pure joy. A brilliant, radiant smile transformed her face. "Yes," she whispered, the word a promise of its own. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." Their wedding was a simple affair, held on the porch of the ranch house as the sun set behind the mesas, painting the sky in the colors of a new beginning. Dr. Abrams stood as Cole's witness, and Thomas Albright, the redeemed lawyer, stood for May. Finn was there too, his future uncertain but his conscience clear. May wore a new dress, the color of cream, sewn by her own hands. Cole, in a clean shirt, looked at his bride and saw not the broken victim from the crate, but a woman of incredible strength and grace. He saw his future. And so their life began. The years that followed were etched into the land itself. The ranch thrived under their combined care. Cole's knowledge of the earth and cattle blended with May's quiet, patient wisdom with plants. The garden Sarah had started became a lush oasis, bursting with vegetables and herbs from 2 different continents. They had children, a son with Cole's steady blue eyes and May's black hair, and a daughter with May's gentle smile and Cole's stubborn chin. The house, once a silent tomb of grief, was filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of a family. Laughter echoed in the halls. The children grew up bilingual, their speech a seamless blend of their father's rustic English and their mother's melodic Mandarin, a living testament to the world their parents had built together. The town changed too. The judge's conviction sent a shockwave through the territory, cleansing the rot that had taken hold. New families moved in, drawn by the promise of a place where justice had, for once, prevailed. Cole and May became quiet legends, their story a founding myth of the community. They were respected, admired, and loved. Seasons turned. Winter settled over the valley, blanketing the world in white, and spring followed, bringing green life back to the prairie. Summers were still hot and dusty, but the heat no longer felt oppressive. It was simply a part of the life they had forged. Decades passed like the turning of pages in a beloved book. Their children grew up and had children of their own. Cole and May became grandparents, their hair turning to silver, their faces mapping the lines of a shared life well lived. The ranch was a hub of activity, grandchildren running through the yard, their laughter the sweetest music Cole had ever heard. One cool autumn evening, Cole, now a very old man, sat on the porch swing with May, just as they had done 1,000 times before. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm was wrapped securely around her. They watched the sun dip below the horizon, setting the clouds ablaze. Her hand, wrinkled and soft, was clasped in his, gnarled and strong. He looked at her, at the woman who had saved him from his own emptiness, who had filled his silent house with love and his broken heart with hope. The love in his eyes was as fierce and true as it had been the day he asked her to be his wife. "It was a good life, wasn't it, my love?" he whispered, his voice thin with age. "The best," she replied, her own voice a soft murmur. That night, Cole passed away peacefully in his sleep, his promise kept, his soul at rest. May lived for 5 more years, the revered and beloved matriarch of the sprawling family they had created. She told their story to her great-grandchildren, the story of the broken cowboy and the girl in the crate, a story of a promise that had blossomed into a legacy of love that would echo across generations, forever rooted in the unforgiving dust of the land they had both learned to call home.